as well and scrub it off.
Well, welcome to our first Third Thursday lecture of 2024. We're so happy that you are joining us this evening. My name is Brittany Cohill. I'm the Executive Director of Mandarin Museum and Historical Society, and we partner with the Mandarin Community Club for our Third Thursday lectures. And so I would like to first thank the Community Club for giving us this lovely venue in which to hold our lecture series. Who has been to Mandarin Museum before or one of our programs? Oh, okay. Who has never been to the museum or one of our programs? Okay, very good. For the handful of you, we have membership applications in the back. So you can all fill one out. We did reopen in August of 2023 with brand new exhibits, and if you've never been, we are located just down the road in Walter Jones Historical Park. Our museum is open Wednesday through Saturday, 10 to 4, and we also offer guided tours of the historic buildings and the park. So I really encourage you to come check us out down there at the museum if you haven't already. I would also like to thank our very generous sponsors, Endless Summer Roofing Company, who they are a local roofing company. Also my neighbors, Claudia, are you here? No? Claudia and Tony Million, very dear friends of mine. If you need a roof, call Endless Summer. They are very honest people. Also, the Ritter Suarez team with One Sotheby International Realty is a generous sponsor of this lecture series, so I thank them as well. And I guess I will not delay any longer. I first want to say what led us to this evening's lecture. Our Spring 2024 series is called Our Mandarin Neighbors. And so everyone in this series between now and May will be residents of our Mandarin community who have really poignant stories that highlight our diversity. And so I stumbled upon Irene and Andrew. One afternoon I was picking my son up from his friend's house off Scott Mill Road, and the friend's dog took off running down the street, right toward Andrew's dog. I did not know these two dogs were best friends, so I was imagining the worst, and so I started taking off after the dog, trying to catch him, but he's a little yappy thing, you can't catch him. And so we end up in the cul-de-sac, and my friend, she's running after me, and she said, well, oh no, they're friends, it's fine, and let me introduce you to the dog's owner. This is Andrew, and so we met, and we just exchanged the normal neighborly pleasantries, and that was that. And then a couple of months later, he came to our Rotary Club of Mandarin meeting as a guest speaker, and he delivered this lecture about his family and their harrowing story of Holocaust survival and immigration to the United States. And I just sat there for the entirety of that meeting thinking, I met Andrew 2 months ago. He's my neighbor, and I had no idea. And how many other stories in our community are there that we just don't even know? And so then now we have our Mandarin neighbors. And without further ado, I will introduce Irene Jaffa and her son Andrew, and they're going to tell the story for you of Irene's parents and their survival of the Holocaust. I'd also like to introduce Hope McMath, and you may know her. She's been in the arts and culture sector in Jacksonville for some time now, and she's going to give a brief introduction before we get started. I would also like to thank the LJD, Jewish Family and Community Services. They are the ones who have also partnered with us on this lecture and have made this possible. So here we go.
Good evening, and thank you. It's an honor to be with all of you tonight. It's an honor to be in this beautiful space in one of our beautiful neighborhoods here in Northeast Florida. My name is Hope McMath, and I have been serving as the curator and a facilitator at Jewish Family Community Services for about 6 years. or so now. And I don't know how many of you know about or have engaged with Jewish Family and Community Services, and I'm not going to be able to do it justice. But it's a critically important nonprofit here in our city. They're one of the oldest. They just celebrated their 104th anniversary of doing service in the Northeast Florida area. They are, the Jewish in their name really refers to the folks who founded and created the agency more than 100 years ago, and they serve tens of thousands of people a year. They are the largest foster care provider in our region. They do after-school programming, they do family counseling, they have a very robust food pantry program, clothes closet, you name it. They are doing really good work for a lot of people. But part of the mission of the agency is also to help take care of the 103 Holocaust survivors that are still living amongst us in the Northeast Florida region. We have 103 who are still living between Fernandina and Palm Coast. And so Jewish Family Community Services is the agency on record that not only is the funnel for reparations from the German government, but also in just making sure those folks are doing okay and have what they need, which at this point is mostly about allowing them to age at home. And so a promise was made to those folks about 7 years ago now that a Holocaust memorial would be built in the renovated buildings of the agency. And so on the screen here, you're seeing just a little glimpse into the Frisch Family Holocaust Memorial Gallery, which is located at the Jewish Family Community Services buildings, which is off of sort of Phillips Highway, Bay Meadows area in Jacksonville. And so that memorial is sort of a permanent space for remembrance, for learning, for collective grieving, as we think about the 6 million Jewish people who were murdered during the Holocaust. And it sits in the middle of a small gallery, and in that gallery we curate exhibitions that relate either to themes of the Holocaust or broader themes about human rights. And so it's through that work that a group of people came together in 2020. Irene was one of the people to sort of spur this work to create a speakers bureau of Holocaust survivors and of second-generation survivors and now third-generation survivors to help tell their family stories as a way to deepen our understanding and attachments to this history. And so we go out wherever anybody will have us. We are in the schools about 4 days a week on average. We are on all the military bases doing Holocaust education, local universities, book clubs, groups like this. And so our folks are real busy sharing stories that are not easy to share, but are important to share and even more important for us to hear. So that's why we are all assembled tonight. Irene and Andrew are going to share their stories. Our format for the evening is going to be somewhat conversational. They both do full-blown, very formal presentations, but there's something just really special about having more than one generation sitting together and sharing their family's history. And you will hear that this actually started with Irene's mother. So it's just this remarkable legacy that is being left here in our city. I am in control of images. We have some historic photos, which is really beautiful and important that we have those, but because they are in conversation with one another, I never know where they're gonna go. So the images might at times be sort of flying back and forth on the screen. I'm gonna do my best to keep up with these two amazing people. But please, let's lift up a whole lot of love for Irene and Andrew Jaffa.
normally goes before my mom has a presentation is she calls me the night before and says, Andrew, you have to come over here. I need you to help me. I need you to help me with my presentation. It's not right. I said, Mom, you've been doing this for years. You've done this over and over. You've got this. She's like, it's not right. This one's different. So she's an artist, so she's always tinkering. And every time I have to come over and reassure her, and she would give an amazing presentation. So when they asked us to do something at the library, I said, you know what, I don't want to be over there the night before. I want to go to sleep the night before. So we decided to do a conversation. And it's fun because there's still a lot of questions that I don't know about her experience, especially her experience growing up. And it's a learning experience for me as well. So that's why we've done this conversation. So you've been doing this for a lot of years. And I guess one question that I still really don't know the answer to is, when did you first hear your mother's story? Like when did you first become, not that you knew that they were Holocaust survivors, but when did you first hear the story where all the pieces were put together?
When I was sitting on the staircase behind the kitchen and my mother didn't know I was there. And she was speaking with a friend.
Wait, is this in Detroit or in
This
Jacksonville?
is in Detroit, of course. And that's where I grew up. I was born in Germany, but we immigrated when I was 2 years old to the United States and ended up in Detroit because my parents had a friend that lived in Detroit, and he promised them that they would like it a lot better than New York. They were overwhelmed with New York when they arrived there. So we ended up in Detroit, and we had a small house there. My father worked at Chrysler as in the automotive business, and at first on the assembly line, but then he was very skilled, and so he had a different kind of a job. And we had this house with a staircase right behind the kitchen, and I could eavesdrop. I could sit there, I'm an only child, there was no other children to have to worry about. I could sit there all day, and if my mother had a friend, I could just listen to their conversation and hear all the things that I wanted to know that they weren't willing to tell me. And that's how it kind of began. And
so how old were you at the time? I mean, honestly, I've never heard the story, so this is really
you know, I was probably 6 or 7 or who knows. I don't really remember, Andrew, but
Were you able to put the pieces together? I mean, were you
probably,
able to follow chronologically?
probably not in the beginning, but after a while, I remember being very, very proud of my parents' background and the fact that they were able to get through something that was such an unbelievable thing to get through and still make it to the United States and to have me and to live an almost normal life. And I say almost because I don't think that anyone that lives through the Holocaust really can say that their life is going to ever be completely normal. I know my parents' life was not.
Did your mom ever sit you down? I mean, did she know that you were eavesdropping? So did she know that you knew the story?
I'm guessing she did, because I think parents really have a sense of that, and maybe she felt like it was okay.
But did she ever sit you down and say, I want to tell you a story?
That was many, many years later. Many, many years, probably after I was married. Actually, they told my husband first, my husband Jimmy. They felt more comfortable sharing information, the kind of information that they had. They felt much more comfortable telling him than telling me. I think they were afraid that it could damage me in some way, but of course I really already knew so much of what they had gone through by eavesdropping or speaking to kids, other kids who I was friends with, whose parents were also Holocaust survivors and friends of ours. And, you know, our whole little group, there weren't many of us, but there were, you know, most of us were only children, by the way. I think that people that lived through the Holocaust only wanted what they could pick up in their arms and run with. And so one child was it for 2 parents. And so all of those children, you know, maybe about 5 kids that my parents were friends with their parents, and we would go to their homes and they would come to our home. And at that time, the kids would, take off and we would share information. So together, we probably had a lot more information than we would have had otherwise.
That's so interesting to me. But you would never ask your parents about the Holocaust. You would never say, "Can you tell me a story?"
Not that, I didn't want that kind of a story from them at that time. That came much, much later.
Were you scared that asking them those questions could upset them?
Of course, because I knew that my mother would cry herself to sleep at night, many nights. I knew that when I was young, we had to sleep with all the lights on in our house. My mother was afraid of the dark. And I knew more about my mother than my father. My father worked the night shift at Chrysler, and he slept all day. And my mother worked during the daytime as a seamstress. And so I just spent more time with my mother and quality time, because my father was home with me, but he was asleep. And when my mother was with me, it was quality time. And my mother and I, when my father was at work at night, my mother and I would walk to the movie theaters so that she could learn English better. The movies helped her learn English, and I remember walking alone, the two of us, to the movie theater. And I spent a lot of time with my mother, even though she worked full time.
What would you and your friends talk about? These were also kids of Holocaust survivors.
That's hard to remember, but
Were they survivors' kids?
most of them were, other than neighbors. The neighborhoods that we lived in, I was friendly with the kids that lived in those neighborhoods, and they were not necessarily Holocaust survivor kids. But the Holocaust survivor kids were people that we would meet on the weekends. On Friday night, on Saturday night, maybe Sunday, and we would go to each other's homes, and usually they came to our home for some reason. I don't know why, but my mother made good cookies. That could have been the reason.
Burnt, usually burnt.
Yes, but people requested her cookies to be burnt. They specifically, they were very, very disappointed if the cookies weren't burnt, so they had to be burnt. And the kids would come and their parents would come, and they had a whole group, and they had a little organization. It was called the Workmen's Circle. It was an organization of Holocaust survivors, and they had meetings and they talked about Holocaust. I imagine I was never invited as a child to those meetings, but they needed each other, because only other people in that group could really understand what they had all gone through. And maybe some of them had different stories to tell. Some of them ended up in Asia, and but all of these people ended up in Detroit, Michigan, and they were there for each other, and they helped each other in every possible way. And we were lucky that we belonged to this kind of a group, and it was probably therapy for all of them. I'm sure none of them went to psychiatrists or psychologists or that kind of a thing. So they needed each other, and it was a good thing. And we liked the kids all liked each other. We weren't best friends. We all had our own friends from our own schools. We didn't live in the same neighborhoods necessarily, but we were friendly and saw each other often, which was a good thing.
What did your mom tell you about their life growing up in Poland?
My mother told me a lot. My mother came from a very, very wealthy family of 8 children, and she was the middle child of 8. She had, I think, 3 sisters, and she loved her brothers. Her brothers took care of her. She had a favorite brother that would always watch out for her and fix her up. In fact, he fixed her up with my father. That's how she met my father.
Milik, right?
Milik, yes. And so she lived in a beautiful apartment in Lodz, Poland, and with the older children were already married and gone, so it wasn't a full, a full house of children when she was there. But she was close with all of them, and other than one brother, all of them were murdered, including her parents and all of the rest of the children. One brother had married a non-Jewish woman, and so he lived as a non-Jew, and so he was the lucky one of the group, and he was alive. But he didn't get out of Europe after the war. His wife was Polish and I guess she didn't want to leave at that time. And they didn't come to the United States until I was about 16 years old, when my parents helped them move to the United States. And they came and they lived with us for a short while, and they had a daughter that was a year older than me, Elizabeth. And they had a son who couldn't get out of Poland, unfortunately, at the time. So I never really knew him. I've only spoken to him on the telephone. It was nice to have some relatives that were alive. And so we did have a few of them. But I didn't grow up with grandparents and aunts and uncles, and I had one aunt, my father's sister, his only sibling, and she lived in Israel. So we didn't have the money to go to Israel, and she didn't have the money to come to the United States. So we really didn't meet for many 20-something years before we met. And she has children, so I had 2 cousins. I just didn't have the opportunity to know them growing up until I was an adult. And so it was a lonely, quiet house with just one child and parents that worked so much. But
you want to maybe tell a little bit about how the war started for your mom?
Yes. Well, you know the story too, so why don't you tell? Yeah, I've done enough talking.
I'll tell a little bit about it. So, better? Okay. So in late summer of 1939, my grandparents were on vacation, and they were at the beach, and they would go off with cousins and everything, and they heard rumblings of the war starting, and they were able to get back to Lodge, and can you put the map back real quick? I'll kind of show them where Lodge is, because it is kind of important. The location is. Uh-oh, that's all right. Anyway, so Lodge is in a little bit west of Warsaw. So when the Germans came in from the west, and the Russians came in from the east on September 1st, Lodz was one of the first cities they came to. It had a very sizable Jewish population. Poland was about 10% Jewish, which is very high. They had about 3.3 million Jews, and the city they lived in, Lodz, was about 33% Jewish. So a lot of Jews in their town of Lodz. So when the Germans came in and they started bombing Lodz, and my grandparents walked to Warsaw, because my grandmothers, they heard on the radio, you need to leave and go to Warsaw. And Warsaw was a little bit further to the east, so they thought they'd be safer. So on their way to Warsaw, which is a 90-mile walk, mind you. So they're walking 90 miles with nothing, no food, no water, no money, nothing. My grandfather was walking with his dad, and he was a religious Jew. Wasn't your father studying to become a cantor?
He was.
He had a beautiful voice, which is totally ironic because I don't even sing happy birthday. People come to our house, and when we sing, they tell us just to be quiet. But he had a beautiful voice. And along the way, German soldiers captured them, and they ripped off my grandfather's father's beard with a bayonet or machete. And we have a picture, not of that exact event, but there are dozens and dozens of pictures of this same event happening to other Jews, because the Germans reveled in this. This was a game to them. And in all the pictures, it's so sinister. You can see in the background of the pictures, you can see the German soldiers smirking, smiling. They took great pleasure in torturing the Jews. And my grandfather and his father turned around and went back to Lodz because they couldn't go any further. His face was bleeding, and my grandmother went on to Warsaw with her brothers. So I'm sure every time my grandmother left my grandfather, I may not see him again, because she said they were walking over dead bodies and dead horses. She said it was just a nightmare, and all the while the Germans are bombing all along the way. And then I'm going to skip a bunch of stories. Then they got to Warsaw, and then they walked back, and there was 26 days of bombing in Warsaw. Then they walked back to Lodz, and when they got back to Lodz, and along the way they saw Jews hanging from gallows, and they would have signs on their chest, signs around their neck, saying, I'm a Jew. And my grandfather was very shrewd, very, very clever in so many ways, and he knew. It's amazing. A lot of people, even with everything that was happening, a lot of people did not know to get out. My grandfather knew. And the day that my dad had a lot of conversations with my grandfather, the day they made the Jews put on the yellow stars, my grandfather said, I'm going to go. And asked my grandmother, said, do you want to come with me? You want to maybe...
Yes, they weren't married yet, and my mother said, let me ask my parents, because that's how things were done in those days, just like today, right? And her parents said, yes. They said to my father, please take her and try to save her life. That's great, but you have to be married. So they performed a quick marriage ceremony, like immediately, and they walked away hand in hand, just the two of them, with nothing in their hands. My mother's parents gave her a bracelet, a ring and a watch, and that was the only thing of value that they had, and they walked east with the plan to get to Russia if possible. It was quite a big undertaking, but somehow or other...
They said goodbye to their family?
Yeah, they never thought they would ever see them again. They had no way to think that they would ever see them again. So they left.
Her favorite brother, they asked her favorite brother, I guess him and his wife, to come with them. And the brother said, I'm going to stay here and take care of our parents. And
I didn't know that.
So
that's so interesting. I didn't know that part.
He stayed with the parents, and of course she never saw him again.
So anyway, they had quite a trip through forests, and at one point my mother remembered the story of my father pushing her under a bush and telling her to just hide there, and he was leaving to scout to see if he could find a place for them to spend the night, if he could find any food for them. And she was hysterical, of course, because she didn't even know what country she was in. She didn't know anything, and she begged him not to leave her, and he said, I have to, and I promise that I'll be back. And she just wasn't sure. So she said she was hysterical, and of course he came back. And when he did, he found what he was looking for. And so for that one night, out of probably hundreds of nights, they were okay. He found some place for them to sleep. I don't know where it was.
They found a woman, a Polish woman, gave them some shelter for the night. And the next day, at 5 a.m., she came and said, you have to go now. At this point in time, they were on the Russian side. The Germans and Russians split Poland along what's called the Bug River. So they had to get to the Bug River, and they got across the river. And when my grandfather was just so shrewd, and he knew not to be impulsive. He knew, just making a quick decision could be life or death. You always say whether you turn left or right is life or death. And he kind of scouted out the area, and it was getting late in the day, and he was watching the Russian soldiers. Russia, it wasn't German soldiers, but it was no cakewalk. So at some point in time, as the sun was coming down, he grabbed her hand and said, "We are going." And he just grabs her hand, he digs his nails into her hand. She said she had the marks for days. And he kept squeezing harder and harder, and he's just dragging her, running. And she says that as they were running, the Polish people that were living in the Russian side of Poland, it's called White Russia, they were screaming at them, "Jews, what are you doing? Go back, they're gonna kill you, then they're gonna kill us." And my grandfather would not listen, and they just ran and ran. My grandmother doesn't know how far, maybe a couple miles, and that they got into the woods, and that's when it was dark by this time, and he put her in the bush. So my grandmother was frantic. Who knows if they had eaten in days? Who knows, what kind of condition they were in, or this is late November, so it was getting cold. Those are all those kind of details you miss from the story when it's, below zero and it's freezing or snowing outside. So those are things that just add to the misery of
They had left at the beginning of September, so they were on the run at this point for quite a while.
Well, they started going, I think, in when the Jewish stars came on.
The day that the stars had to be worn is the day that they left.
Right.
And that's what spurred my father on to leaving. He said he's not going to wear a star. He's going to run away.
A very, very proud man. Then after that, they got to the train station. Their goal was to get further east. So they wanted to go to Bialystok, where my grandmother had a sister, Dora, who my brother's named after. And they get to the train station. You can just imagine how many thousands of refugees of Jews are trying to get onto